Ladies and gentlemen, if you listen to the podcast regularly enough, you'll hear a quick blurb of the guest to kind of catch your attention. Then I'll say something, and then we'll get right into the podcast. Alex, today I want to hit him, man. Today I want to hit him. We've had some listeners straggling, listening to these podcasts, but not subscribed to the newsletter. So what's your elevator pitch to motivate people? You and I have a little side bet going that we might announce after I win it by the end of the year about getting 3,000 subscribers. So can you help me win the bet and get some people to subscribe? Why should people subscribe, and who's this newsletter for?
I think we're trying to be the highest quality newsletter that focuses on the science of performance, full stop, in the industry. So whether it's running, truthfully, it doesn't even have to be running. It could be just pursuing mastery in anything. But particularly endurance sports, I think you're going to find really high quality information. It's going to be scientifically grounded, and it's going to be battle tested with not only myself, having been through a lot of experience, but also with professional athletes I coach, and the copious amounts of research studies that I consume on a regular basis. So we try to bring it to our audience in a digestible way. And we've gotten some really good traction from those who have subscribed. So, just if you want to see what you're missing out on, just go to the Substack link and make it happen.
It's completely free. Can always unsubscribe. I check occasionally. I don't really ever see people unsubscribe. So I think we have a high retention rate, which means we bring people value. It means we're making your competitors faster if you're listening and you're not subscribed. So don't be at a disadvantage. Go subscribe. Alex, I think you had a workout today. How'd it go? How are the Christmas spirits before the holiday?
Yeah,
People showing up in Santa hats. What's the vibe at practice these days?
No, a little more serious than that. Although having a little bit of holiday cheer wouldn't be a bad thing. Yeah, last practice in Eugene before we all dispersed for the holidays. So I'm catching a red eye home tonight. Most of the athletes here in town are going to be heading out to go spend the holidays with their families. So it was good. Yeah, it was a grueling hill session. For those who have had the privilege of running difficult hill workouts, you know that no matter how fit you are, go to a hill and run up it 10 times, you'll be reminded of how much more fitness you have to gain. You just feel terrible every time you do it. So it's even the pros doing it, they suffer. Everyone suffers on the hills. So it's good. It's good work.
Two quick questions for you. Besides craft excellent newsletters, what are you normally doing to pass time on your flights? Because I know that's a long way from Eugene, Oregon to Connecticut. And then my second question in regards to what you just spoke there, what's the value you see in doing more of an effort-based workout? Like hill workouts times don't really mean anything, in
No.
my opinion. So how valuable do you think specifically this time of year it is to do those workouts if you're an athlete listening and kind of get away from really specific splits or being in your head or really tracking fitness, specifically when 90% of the people listening are living in environments where it's just not going to be ideal weather?
Yeah. So to answer question one, you already hinted at it, but I've spent probably the majority of my flights in the past 3 months working on this newsletter. So I know that's what I'll be doing tonight in all likelihood, because we have the last episode of 2025 that I need to work on, which is going to be this is actually another little carrot to dangle in front of your audience. I'm going to do a little year in review of the rundown and bring up kind of the 10 best ideas from the newsletter itself, and the ideas that had engagement and traction with our audience. So that'd be a good one if you wanted to just get a high level overview where we really consolidate the findings into kind of really good insights. You can look for that. Your second question was the value of hills at this time of year. I'm a big believer personally. I think that when you're going on the track and trying to run, well, first of all, I think hills are speed work in disguise. It never feels like it because you start suffering and typically you start breaking down a little bit towards the top. But I think in terms of muscle recruitment, in terms of the metabolic like acidosis that you're putting yourself through, nothing simulates the end of a race as well as the last like 30 to 50 meters of a climb. Like you don't feel that sensation almost anywhere else in practice. And if you did, the things you'd have to do on flat ground to get there would require you to be completely all out. So I actually think it's a low risk way to really improve form, you have great cardiovascular output, and truthfully, you just feel pain that you never feel anywhere else. So I think really high yield, super valuable. You can keep hills in year round, but I think right now at a time of year where the training can be more effort based, and the rhythm of running a certain pace per 400 meters on the track is not as important. Great tool.
For those who are not familiar with the cadence, we sit down, Alex and I, every single month, and we break down the previous 4 newsletters that Alex has written and kind of break them down audibly as well as ideas off of them. The first edition to break down today, the way you do one thing should not be the way you do all things. Producer talk between you and I. You've talked about this quite a bit in our conversations, which is why I wanted you to write a newsletter. So maybe we keep this one shorter and elaborate on some of the other ones. But I think I love this one because I told you this on a phone call or a text message. I see people on social media all the time. The way, they love to just grit their teeth. The way you do one thing is the way you do all things. This is why I put my shopping cart back, XYZ, XYZ. And you once enlightened me to the opposite on a podcast years ago. So I really wanted you to write about this. So elaborate on this.
Yeah, it might be a little bit of a hot take, but there's this phrase that gets tossed around in high performing circles, right? Which is the way you do one thing is the way you do all things. And I think when you actually really critically evaluate that statement, it kind of starts to break down for some fairly obvious reasons, in my opinion. I think the problem is that high performers try to apply the same optimized all in energy to everything that they do. And when you're trying to optimize every single corner of your life, almost by definition, you're going to be stretched too thin. I think people want to have it all. They want to be well rounded and they want to be balanced. But the reality is that the most successful people live kind of lopsided lives. They recognize where they need to put the majority of their energy, and then they also recognize what goes on maintenance mode. That doesn't mean they're neglecting it entirely, but like you need asymmetric effort allocation across your top priorities. If you have 6 things in life that you care about and you really want to move the needle on your top 2, you're going to have to put numbers, 3, 4, 5, and 6 on the back burner for a period of time and then really invest in 1 and 2. Like I think work-life balance is a little bit of a misnomer. I'm not saying that in theory it's a bad thing, but there are certain periods of life where if you really want to make meaningful progress, you kind of have to go all in. And there's a phenomenal quote that I referenced in this piece from Molly Huddle, who was speaking to Emily Sisson kind of in the prime of her marathon career, right around when she set the American record. And she said that it's okay to go all in on something. Well-rounded is great, but pointy is a cool extreme too. She says there's a short time in life when you can try to be great at something. Most people never even get the chance. So I think it's just a good reminder that, you know, trying to, evenly distribute your effort across all of your top priorities probably means you're diluting quality somewhere. And I'm almost just saying, like, you should give yourself permission if you want to be really great at something, be willing to go all in. And it's okay to be pointy or a little bit lopsided. Evaluate what you potentially are missing, but recognize that the people who you're competing against at the highest levels are probably doing that.
I think you quoted it in this newsletter. I should honestly reference, but by trying to be like you and do things off of memory. You've also said this on the podcast before. The quote that I think Milt told you in college. Can you share that with the audience? Something about you can only be good at. You got to pick the 3 things you want to be good at, or 2 of the 3,
Oh
or something
yeah,
like
yeah,
that.
yeah. So this is actually a quote I heard in I believe in high school. It came up again in college, and it's like everyone wants to have it all, as I've already said. And I heard from someone that like most people in college want 3 things. They want good grades, they want a social life, and they want to sleep. And you really only can pick 2 of the 3. Now, I actually had a very productive exchange offline with a coach who messaged me about that, and he said, I don't necessarily agree with that statement because I think the thing that is crowding out those priorities now is time on your smartphone. And if you're actually smart about your screen time, you can just open up a lot more space in life. And I was told him, I was like, fair point. Like I was fortunate enough to go to high school at a period of time when smartphones had not really taken over yet. So maybe that's a confounding variable. But I think the calculation is really still the same. You have to identify a few things that matter most and cut the rest. You just can't really have it all. That's just an uncomfortable truth of the situation.
Fair point. I don't know who reached out to you, so no hate if you're listening. Fair point, but let's not assume that it's easy to get a high schooler by just verbally stating you should change your habits to go from 8 hours on average to 3 hours. And I love to pontificate all the time myself. Oh, if I looked at my phone less, that's 2 hours times X, the amount of businesses I can make them at. And it's just like, it just doesn't work like that. Sometimes it does, but it's really hard. And I think specifically, you and I know, even from trying to get people to subscribe to the newsletter, which is free and literally takes a few dots on your phone to do. it's really hard to motivate people to get to do stuff. So
Yeah.
it's hard
Yeah.
to change behavior.
Yeah. The last thing I'll say on this is I think when you look at people from afar, you might assume that they're well balanced or they have it all figured out. But I think when you get closer, you know what they say, right? Like never meet your heroes because you're always going to be disappointed. There's this phenomenon in psychology called the halo effect, which is our tendency to allow one really positive trait, like if someone's an incredibly good athlete, to kind of distort the way we view them. And that one trait, like that extraordinary athletic ability, kind of spills over and colors our judgment. And so I think when we see someone excel at something, we assume that the rest of their life mirrors that excellence, but it rarely does. Like I said, the more extreme the success that someone experiences, in all likelihood, the more lopsided their life is going to be. So I would just say, like, you're probably viewing your heroes with a halo, and you better take that halo off because professional runners or whoever you aspire to be, like I see it up close, like they all struggle, they all have their challenges. So it's not all as glamorous as it seems. But when you have a highly curated Instagram feed coupled with admiration, we don't always view things very clearly.
I think all the most successful people I know, from business to sports, it comes with such a crippling pressure that is not fun to live with, and they wouldn't wish upon their enemies. And I think if you're a listener out there, you don't want it. I think the happy medium and the happy balance is like you're doing well enough where you feel secure, but you don't always feel the need to go to the next level. I think, Alex, you're like me, where I don't think we could live with ourselves if we didn't keep chasing and pursuing things. But I think with that comes, you know, certain work ethics or certain things in life that come with those crazy pressures. So I think we always talk about a common theme in our conversations is you got to sit down and figure out what you want and then act backwards from it. My other thought in regards to that was, I almost wonder if sort of the buckets, they change over time, right? For
Hmm.
me, family will be way more of an emphasis when I have kids, when I have my immediate family, when I get married. Right now, in this point of life, if any of my siblings or my parents called me, I'd pick up, and I try to regularly stay in touch, specifically with my parents and with my siblings. But in this season of life, it makes way less sense than when I have a newborn baby, right? I'm probably going to have to shift a little bit of the work bucket and the workout bucket. Talk to any new dad.
Hmm.
Getting the workouts in the first 2 weeks of your newborn's life, it's not going to happen. So I also think part of the game of life is realizing, okay, where's my energy going to be best spent in this chapter in this season?
Yeah, there's actually an interesting analogy here if you compare this strategy of kind of allocating effort and focus to investing. And I'll just say up front, I'm not an investment expert at all, but I'm kind of passively interested in it. And there's some really interesting information out there about how this, like a small number of things drive the majority of returns in the stock market or in someone's portfolio. And so there's this really interesting stat I found that if you've been invested in the stock market for 20 years, you've probably earned roughly 10% annually. If you missed the best 10 days in those 20 years, your returns will fall to 5%. And if you miss the best 20 days, your gains go to roughly zero. And so it's this like power law distribution in life where a very, very small number of days drive massive returns. And the same thing, like Warren Buffett was quoted as saying that he owns somewhere between 400 and 500 stocks, but 10 of them have made almost all of his money. Right. And so related to what you were just saying, a lot of people will talk about like your asset allocation over the course of life. When you're young, you want to have a really, really aggressive portfolio, right? Like you want to own a lot of stocks and fewer, more conservative strategies. And then as you shift closer to retirement, you want to have a much more conservative approach where like you have a lot more things that are guarantees. And so I think it's just one of those things where just like focus, you have to pick and choose, and you have to realize that putting all of your energy in a small number of things are probably going to drive outsized returns.
What would you say to the people that feel kind of an innate guilt if they accept this truth that, um, like I think the runners and running attracts a type A sort of individual. A type A sort of individual finds it hard to concede the fact that they might put more effort or care more about one thing than they might care about another thing.
I think it just depends on what you're optimizing for. Um, like no one is telling you like you are at the end of the day the author of your own story. And I think there are some people like right now with where I'm at, like I am at peace with the fact that I will never run faster, most likely than 13, 18 in the 5K. Like I did that for a phase of my life, and I now view my life more in terms of seasons rather than trying to like, you know, get it all done at the same point in time. I'm like, I'd rather sequence my goals and recognize that I went through a season of my life where I was trying to be an incredibly good collegiate runner, even a semi-professional runner. And like that season has come and gone. And now I'm like, okay, I have an opportunity right now to be, the best coach that I can be. And that's really what I'm sinking my teeth into. So I would just say, like, as you mentioned, there are seasons of life, and just be able to recognize that, you know, sometimes the inertia of a passionate experience can really be intoxicated. It can sweep you up, but you have to recognize what the potential collateral damage is, right? Like if you go all in on one thing, something else is probably going to suffer. Just make sure you know what's suffering, and be mindful that you're not paying for something that you don't realize.
Any other notes here, or can we move on?
Let's move on.
Not all miles are created equal. Smarter ways to measure load, manage injury risk, and actually understand your training. Um, this is actually funny. I don't know how this happened. So shout out Oliver if you're listening, graphic designer who helps with some of the graphics. I think it was this one where he made a graphic. To me, it logically made sense, but classic social media, someone's always going to be like, that doesn't really add up. He was trying to, I think, create an analogy with the hard thing about creating graphics from our newsletters is like sometimes the material is quite sophisticated. So I think the graphic for this one, which if you can see, he was basically comparing like 40 pounds of pillows to 40 pounds of bricks. And he made a caption off of it. This post had 3.5 million views, and I don't know how, but people were so going back and forth in the comments, and I just thought, man, sometimes it pays to be a little controversial.
Right.
Unintentionally. He did not intentionally do that at all. I haven't talked to him
Right.
about it, but I thought it was funny.
Yeah, I let you guys take care of that. I do the writing, and then I'll typically like it when I see it on my Instagram feed, which I check like once a day and sometimes forget. But anyway, I'll let you guys handle the online controversy. I'm just gonna worry about
So
writing.
one of the top comment is, I'm sorry, how are 40 pounds of pillows in all caps not the same as 40 pounds of bricks? Pretty sure I've seen a comedy sketch about this. And then the comments below that are just going back and forth. It was gold.
No, that's good. Yeah, you're right. Sometimes you need to put some controversial opinions out there. But anyway, yeah, on this topic, I think runners live and die by their mileage count, right? I mean, Strava has made this potentially even worse. Coaches will typically ask for mileage reports over the summer. Everyone will typically track their weekly mileage and sometimes sneak in an extra run or a double or add an extra mile just to hit a round number at the end of the week. And we have this religious attachment to it, and mileage is a fine thing to measure, but I think it's a fairly crude measurement, and it leaves out a lot of nuance that could be important when you're thinking about uh, how to track training. It basically collapses every single. There's a lot of subcomponents of mileage that really matter, and mileage collapses all of these things, like you know your the vert that you gain and lose throughout a week, how fatigued you feel, how many miles you're running at a certain intensity. It takes all of that and it boils it down to one number that I think hides a lot more than it actually reveals. And so I think that you know, people will a lot of times use mileage as a guardrail to think about how can I progress my training? Where do I need to pull back? And I think that there are better metrics out there to explain potentially what could cause you to break down rather than just how far you ran that week. And there's some nice scientific explanations. So I think mileage is useful, but it's not really enough. And there's a few other things that I like to track a lot more.
A lot of questions off of this one, trying to think what makes most sense to go off of. I think one of the things I was interested in was the section single session spikes. Can you take people through that? I think that's applicable to a lot of the listeners here.
Yeah, exactly. This observation was motivated by a study that I read earlier this year. It's called the Garmin Run Safe study. They looked at over 5,000 runners. Um, and what they found was that injuries rose almost exponentially when people logged a single session that exceeded their recent training norms. So for instance, if you're used to going out and doing like a 15-mile long run, um, and the other days of the week you're running like, I don't know, 5 or 6 miles, let's say you're preparing for a marathon, the session that carried the greatest risk for potential injury is if you took that 15-mile long run and exceeded it and you went up to like 16, 17, 18 miles. And it was a dose response relationship. So the more you exceeded your prior peak or your single outlier in the past, the more at risk you were for getting injured. So I think what it goes to show is that, mileage matters. But again, one thing that mileage hides is how is that mileage distributed in the week? Just knowing that you ran 60 miles, you could do 60 miles off of a 10-mile long run, or you could do it off of a 23-mile long run. And that's a huge difference right there. So we need to look at, a slightly more granular measure to assess risk. So I think the takeaway here, there's a few. One is that the longest run of the week carries its own risk profile. So you have to remember that when you do these super long runs, these super taxing sessions, you want to build in buffers both before and afterwards. So leading into that long run, you want to be relatively well rested. And then afterwards, make sure that you appreciate the deficit you put yourself in and actually recover off of that. The other one, and I see people mess this up all the time, is that if you're coming back from an injury, don't anchor yourself to your old normal, right? Like if you're used to going out and running a 13-mile long run normally, but you've taken 2 months off and you're building back, you can't just go back and just like do a 13-mile long run again without building that capacity once more. So you have to build from real time capacity and not remembered capacity, which I think is a huge mistake that runners make. You have to train where you're at today, not where you once were.
What are your thoughts on doing a bunch of 3-mile runs and then going out and doing 26 miles? I know a guy who
That's
did
what
that
you did,
once.
right?
Yeah.
I mean,
I felt like shit for a few days after, but
yeah.
dude, you gotta run a marathon purely for that. Because even if you train really well, this a lot of times is going to be the physical manifestation. Racing a marathon is one of the 4 hours after are one of the most interesting experience. You're hobbling around like you forgot to walk.
Yeah.
And you don't really have that in any other race because of the load of the marathon. I think it's
Yeah.
very unique in that. But anyways, getting us back on track, jokes aside, I think we're in a unique time of the year. It's the winter and the summer where I feel like a lot of people feel like they need to go and do crazy mileage amounts just because it's kind of the off season, the base building period. And while I think you would agree that running more is a quick way to get faster, you have to run more intentionally and do it in a smart and safe capacity. What
Yeah.
would you say to the people out there who kind of have that mindset and specifically over the holidays have all this free time? And so they're kind of chomping at the bit to do more. What would you say to them in terms of, yes, running more can get you faster, but you got to do it in a smart way, specifically with the information you just shared in mind about how the spikes can cause injury?
Absolutely. Running more in broad strokes will help you get better, but how you arrive at that place matters too. So I think a couple of principles that are worth reiterating here is that you always want to avoid changes, like sudden changes in any direction, right? Typically, when you're increasing, the body always responds to gentle nudges rather than big pokes. You have to. What I tell people a lot of times is you have to earn the right to run more miles. You can't just take a shortcut to 60 miles a week or whatever it is if you're running less than that. So remember that when you're progressing, progress deliberately and strategically. Just hammering out a block of high mileage is going to put you at way greater risk and increase your likelihood of getting hurt compared to like slow, steady progression of getting to the same point over, taking 3 times as long to get there. So I would say trying to be a mileage hero uh, does not normally work. Like I wouldn't reward mileage. I would reward intelligent training. And those two things are not always the same. You need to know what your own capacity is, what your own breaking points are, and then you need to build to those places strategically.
I'm forgetting if you mentioned this in the newsletter, but how would you also define sort of, I mean, this is honestly what the whole newsletter is, but specifically, I don't know if you referenced the principle you've taught me about, which is like you rarely should increase intensity and volume at the same time. And
Yeah.
that's where a lot of injuries occur, where athletes don't just say, I'm going to raise my mileage this week, but they also say, I'm going to raise my workouts this week. And that's an intentional thing too with athletes when you're starting a new build. Generally, you have to be intentional with those workouts early on, not being too intense because the focus is the volume and not the intensity. Just as when you're trying to sharpen up or peak, the volume comes down so that the intensity can rise without you getting injured.
100%. I mean, you just explained it very well. The way I like to think about that is you have these dials that you turn in training. You got your volume, your intensity. your frequency, density, whatever you want to call it. You only really want to turn one of those dials at once, maybe two if you're really experienced. If you try to make too many changes, it tends to come back and bite you. I did write about this a little bit in the newsletter, which is that not all miles are created equal. Faster running alone, like more intense running, produces much higher forces per stride. It puts way more stress on the muscles, tendons, and bones. And so, like a 20% increase in mileage that comes exclusively from speed work would be far more concerning for me than the same increase from just easy running alone. So I think when you're adding volume, it's much better to add that volume from a place of just easy running first, and then once you've built up to what you consider to be your goal mileage, only then do you typically want to layer like intensity or speed work on top of that. Now, you can do strides, but I'm talking like very taxing, hard speed workouts are typically not something you want to be doing while you're also trying to hit your mileage peak. You have to be able to sequence those variables typically.
And that's also, those workouts themselves are something that you can build on top of week over week. For instance, you did 400s 2 weeks ago. Well, that quote unquote mileage can go up to maybe 10 400s, and that's not going to be too drastic on the body.
Right.
What's the biggest takeaway you want the listener to walk away with in regards to their
Yeah.
training?
There's actually a nice little Calvin and Hobbes comic strip I put at the bottom here, which
Which was
maybe I
a
won't.
nice throwback to history. Real ones
Exactly.
now.
Yeah, exactly. I said that just to give a little recap, you'll have to look at the newsletter to read it in its entirety. But Calvin asks his dad, they're driving over a bridge and it says load limit 10 tons. And he says, how do they know the load limit on bridges, dad? And his dad replies, well, they drive bigger and bigger trucks over the bridge until it breaks. Then they weigh the last truck and rebuild the bridge. And it kind of dawned on me that this is kind of how we treat mileage sometimes. We only really discover our limits by blindly adding more and more volume, more intensity, longer sessions, whatever it is, until something breaks. Then we look backwards retrospectively and we decide that whatever we did last must be the problem. And I think we can do it way better. Like a runner who is handling high mileage isn't lucky. In all likelihood, they've built the capacity to get there gradually. And then a low mileage runner isn't necessarily safe all the time, because if they throw in a huge long run, then all of a sudden that spikes their risk. So high training loads per se don't cause injuries, but how you get there does. And I think that's the big takeaway.
Next edition, cooldowns are overrated, debunking the most common claims about the post-workout jog. We're being controversial here, Alex. Tapping into it. What's your thought on this?
Well, let me flip it over to you for a second here. When you cooled down, or when you've ever had a coach tell you to cool down, like what did you think was happening? Like what was the scientific basis, or what was the basis of doing it? May not have necessarily been scientific.
Oh gosh. I think the scientific basis that I felt was you were this is going to be so off of what it probably actually is, but my high school brain thought you were like shaking out some of the lactic acid.
Yeah.
You were getting some of the junk out of your legs. You were allowing your body to maybe not like temperature wise cool down, but just like take a moment to like breathe, reflect from the workout. But I honestly think that the true answer here, which might be dumb from a training perspective, but specifically after track workouts, is it was just to get mileage in. Because a
Yeah.
lot of times, if you're running more mileage, your workouts, again, as we're talking about, the mileage won't be as high as your total volume normally is if it was
Yeah.
just like an easy run day. So there were times I was doing 3 mile cooldowns, which I really did not need to be doing in high school. And that you write about in this edition, I think after a mile and a half, I was like, I think I'm making myself more tired by doing more volume right now.
Yeah. Well, thank you. You set me up well here, because what I tried to do is break down or really address a lot of the misconceptions there's these persistent myths that surround the cool down that we just can't seem to get rid of. And if you actually look at the science, they're kind of completely unfounded theories, but they've just hung around for way too long. So let's take it one by one. You actually did say one thing in there that I fully believe in, and I'll explain. But the first thing that you mentioned is this by far the most pervasive myth, in my opinion, is that cooling down kind of clears the junk out of your legs, which is a very ambiguous term, or lactic acid, whatever you want to say. And um, so basically, lactic acid is when you're running really, really hard, you produce lactate and hydrogen ions, which cause that burning sensation in your legs. The way we talk about cooling down is almost like taking a clogged pipe and we're trying to just like flush it out. Um, the reality is that your heart never stops beating. So there's constant circulation through your muscles. And so it's not like, yes, running will force a little more cardiac output through those vessels. So maybe you'll move the metabolic byproducts of exercise out of your muscles slightly faster, but there is absolutely zero evidence that clearing lactate from your muscles like 5 to 10 minutes faster, which might happen through running rather than just standing still, has any meaningful outcome on how you feel the next day. It's totally negligible. Not to mention, there's a lot of myths around lactate or lactic acid to begin with, which is that like it doesn't actually it's not that harmful. It doesn't linger around in your muscles if you just stand still. It will either be burned or recycled and turned into something useful. So this idea that we need to cool down to clear the junk out of your legs isn't really there's really no physiological basis for that claim. And it just doesn't really hold up. I would bet that if you actually systematically tested it, and studies have done this, people don't feel any worse the next day from having jogged 2 miles versus just done nothing and had a snack after their workout. The things that really matter that actually move fitness is the work itself, not what you add on after that. So that's number one. Number two, typically the cool down is an afterthought, as you mentioned. Like when the workout is done, you're all excited, and then you're like, oh, I got to go out and I got to go run like 15 to 20 minutes. In my opinion, that is the definition of junk miles. That is miles you're running when you're depleted, typically of glycogen, which you need to refill ASAP if you're training a lot. Glycogen is a stored form of carbohydrate. Secondly, you're probably just running around with terrible form because you're tired. So like, what's the point of just like shuffling around a parking lot with really bad biomechanics just to log more miles? Like, if anything, put those miles in the warm up or something when you're fresher. But this idea that like we need to do it for mileage, I'm just like reallocate that elsewhere. Go for a double. I don't know later. Those are kind of some of the myths that you brought up. The one thing I think you did say, which I fully agree with, is that the cool down is one way to bring the body and the mind off of the stress of a workout by helping you kind of tone down the sympathetic nervous system. So typically you're really, really revved up after a workout. And the one thing the cool down is it's kind of a way to transition from exercise, like really, really intense exercise back to a resting state. And but I don't know if the jog necessarily needs to do that. One thing that I always loved about cooling down is like typically I'd be, just joking around with my teammates and we'd be having a great time and just like laughing or debriefing on the session. And there's actually some really interesting research out there I first saw published in a book called Peak Performance by Brad Stulberg and Steve Magnus, which said that social recovery can be really important. The people you surround yourself with after a workout can shift your hormonal state a lot. And I think it's one way to just like kind of fully reset the body. So rather than thinking that miles itself do all the work, I think the people around you in the space to unwind is just as important.
What's the ideal amount in your brain that athletes should be cooling down, and how much does that change depending on the level you're at, high school, college, professional, or would you say the science just makes it pretty consistent across the board?
So personally, like I said, I'm not anti cooldown, I'm anti mindless cooldown. I write that in the piece. I personally think that the suggestion would be about the same for anyone at any level, which is, in my opinion, like 5 to 10 minutes. I think like 15 to 20, you can do it, but I think you're running with poor biomechanics. You're just causing more damage and more depletion, truthfully.
Real quick, how
Yeah.
controversial is this? I feel like almost all college programs and professional teams are like the 3 mile cooldown, 3 mile warm up, 3 mile cooldown. Am I
Yeah, I don't
wrong?
know. Maybe I came from a program with Mill where we would typically do 15 at the most.
Really?
Uh, yeah, and I tell the pros that I coach, like, I mean, they are so exhausted after some of our hardest sessions. I'm like, you're not getting much from jogging more than a mile right now. Just like go out, jog a mile. Like your body needs carbs more than it needs miles right now, for instance, carbs and protein. Like, at the end of the day, what's happening is that you leave a really hard workout depleted, damaged, and dehydrated. Recovering from those specific deficits is what determines how well you bounce back, not whether you log extra mileage. So the goal after a workout, in my opinion, is very simple. You have to start reversing the cost of the session as soon as possible. And the longer you delay that, the more of an opportunity cost there is. And typically running more just gets in the way of the things that actually matter, which is refueling with carbohydrates and protein, rehydrating yourself, and then relaxing.
Where does training for the marathon come into play where there might actually be some benefit to running on tired legs while also prioritizing volume? Or would you say similar principle applies there?
You could make an argument that perhaps for a marathon, it becomes a little bit more important. Um, there is definitely there, typically the main thing that you're combating in the marathon is the point of bonking, which is like when you hit the wall at mile 20 something, because your body can only store so much glycogen, and that glycogen is what is powering your high end energy output. So you could make an argument that running a little bit depleted for a marathoner is useful, but I think those sessions, those like depletion sessions, should be few and far between. This is not something you should be doing on a regular basis, because I think it's potentially a high risk, high reward, or high risk, medium to low reward endeavor. I really just think there are better ways to accumulate volume, and doing it when you're exhausted and depleted is not the best way.
Moving on for the sake of time, last piece. When winning stops feeling good, how anticipation, dopamine, and expectation shape the emotional arc of performance. Take me through this story you start out with in this piece.
Yeah. So I've raced more than 100 times in my running career now. And the race that always stands out in my memory is the one where I felt the most euphoric afterwards was probably when I qualified for Foot Locker Nationals the first time. So this would have been November of 2013. I was a junior in high school. Making Foot Lockers at the time was like the pinnacle. Like that's what me and my coach had been preparing for years. And when I went to Van Cortlandt Park, a few days after Thanksgiving, my junior year, and did it, I was third, which was kind of a surprise. I came in on the bubble, so I was like someone who could qualify on a good day, but there was no guarantee. When I walked out of that race third, and I was like, I just punched my ticket to San Diego. I was in complete disbelief. It was, I mean, literally like, yeah, I mean, I can't even, like, words can't even describe how elated I was. So I went to nationals that year. It was totally like naive to the whole experience, but it was awesome. Like I was excited to fill out the travel paperwork to go to San Diego, because that's how enthusiastic I was to get the qualifying spot. So I go to nationals. I get 11th, which is great. Technically, that's All American at Foot Locker at the time. It was, and that was that. And so then what happened is, of course, I was returning as a senior the following year in 2014, and I had a great cross country season. I was undefeated. I set a lot of course records, and I came into Van Cortlandt and I won the race decisively, but it almost felt like nothing. I crossed the line and I was like, yeah, like everyone expected me to do that. So I'd actually objectively run better. I'd run faster. I'd won more dominantly, but the whole thing felt completely underwhelming and like emotionally flat. And then I went to San Diego and it was the same thing. I ran 10 seconds faster. I finished ninth instead of 11th, but I kind of walked away feeling like, wait, that's all it was. Like I thought I would feel something a little bit more here. And I think it revealed a fundamental truth about biology and psychology, which is that um, you know becoming is a lot more enjoyable than being, and it's not necessarily the pursuit of happiness, but you find happiness in the pursuit. And I think the anticipation of doing something and finally doing it for the first time carries a totally different emotional experience than doing something when you're expected to win or expected to come back and perform. So anyway, that was a long setup, but that's kind of was the impetus for writing this piece. I wanted to understand, why did that feel so underwhelming when I actually ran better that second year? Because it was so puzzling at the time.
Do you almost think that your goal has to be 50-50 enough for when you do it for it to actually be more special? Because like you said, and you walked me through in that story, you were expected to win, you thought you would win, and so anything less than a win your senior year was going to be a disappointment. Whereas your junior year, there was a level of, and you write about this, anticipation
Hmm.
that I can maybe make it, but I don't know, and then you ultimately make it. This was very similar for me. My junior year, I wouldn't even say on the bubble, probably outside the bubble to make the state championship meet, and I made it off of a few weeks of training because I was injured. Same thing, nothing like that feeling at all. And I probably did stuff in my high school career a little more impressive than that. Doesn't even come close. And I think it's because they anticipate, it was a moonshot goal. And I thought I could do it if I had the day, and I had the day, and that's what made it special.
Right, right. Exactly. In the piece, I say that like confirmation isn't pleasurable, but surprise is. You kind of you need to be on the, like, essentially what drives satisfaction and enjoyment after the fact is a prediction error between expectations and reality. If your expectations are sky high, living up to those expectations are going to be nearly impossible. If your expectations are low and you exceed them, you get this surge of dopamine, and like you just, I mean, you get that feeling that we're describing when you act, when you finally do it. When you're, if you're questioning it beforehand and you're not sure you can do something and you finally come through, like pull through, I mean, that's what drives the biology of excitement. And I also read in the piece here that like there's this strange emotional math where small but unexpected wins can often feel better than large unexpected ones. Like a breakthrough workout on a random Tuesday can often feel better than a carefully choreographed race that goes exactly as planned. Or alternatively, like a surprise PR by like half a second can feel amazing, but a must-win victory where you're expected to do so can feel like a narrow escape when you finally pull it off. So there's this strange thing where after some of my biggest races, when I've come in with expectations or as a favor or something, the dominant emotion afterwards isn't excitement, it's relief more than anything, which I have found to be a common thread amongst really high performers. There's a great podcast. Sorry, it's actually not your own. It was on Sidious Mag with Alex Gibby. You're going to have to get Gibby on and you can interview him and ask him the same story. But he was one who coached Graham Blanks to the NCAA title in cross a couple years ago, and also coached Maya Ramsden to a title in Austin when she was an underclassman. And he tells this story about how he's like, he goes up to Graham after he wins cross country nationals unexpectedly. And he's like, dude, you're like the people's champ right now. You're the underdog who won. You're never going to feel this again. He's like, you're going to come back to this meet as a defending champion. And there's only going to be one outcome that feels acceptable, which is to win again. So like that, this first victory is going to be pure joy. Whereas that second victory is often relief. And so that's why at the beginning of people's career, like typically there's a lot more excitement, and then later on like that internal pressure, having to prove yourself, like it's a lot more challenging and often doesn't have the same emotional payoff.
How can coaches leverage what you wrote about in this piece, the science, the facts, all of that, for their athletes to ultimately perform better, but more specifically, feel better about themselves amidst the grind of training and life and racing?
Yeah, exactly. But I think that the fundamental premise of this piece is that we all lean on the arrival fallacy a little bit too much. The arrival fallacy being, once I achieve X, I will finally feel satisfied. And I think you have to recognize that, like we've talked about this quote before. If you go back to your childhood and you think about what your dreams were back then, you've already achieved a lot of the things that you said would already make you happy. And the reality is that if you do that mental time travel and you look at all the things that you've accomplished and you recognize that, like, oh yeah, like that felt good, but like, it didn't fundamentally change my life. I haven't been problem free, or I haven't been in like eternal bliss ever since. Same thing's probably going to happen in the future. I'm not saying striving and ambitions are bad things, but it's just your ambition is always going to outpace your level of satisfaction. It's just a common human trap that like we are designed for wanting more than we are liking. That is literally how your brain is designed. So I wouldn't necessarily feel bad if like a second victory feels emotionally flat or underwhelming. Just know that like that's probably normal. And I think with that means that typically, um, well, actually, there's a few tactics, but the follow-up piece to this one is basically the tools to address the arrival fallacy. So maybe we need to save that for the next podcast. The title of that piece, by the way, if anyone wants to take an early look, is called the gold medal won't fix you. And basically, I go through like, this is the arrival fallacy, and here are a few strategies for coping with it because it's so hard for a lot of people.
If you had to choose one of these editions for a reader to read, new to the newsletter, close out their year, which of the four would it be?
I think the thing that will be the most tactical and applicable for a runner is probably Not All Miles Are Created Equal. If you want to talk about fundamental skills and knowledge that will help you stay healthy and make steady progression over the years, I would I would say that you should read that one. Not All Miles Are Created Equal. So much of success in the sport, truthfully, is just not making idiotic mistakes. And so many new runners just make decisions that like just ultimately are very short-sighted and come back to cause problems. So if you can try to just like make decisions that are a little bit less dumb sometimes, this is what I tell myself. I'm not saying this to the audience necessarily, But if, you don't necessarily need to be brilliant all the time. If you could be a little bit less dumb in certain instances, and a lot of injuries are just traced back to people being overly ambitious, or potentially just not being analytical enough with how they're running their miles or how they're distributing their intensity. So I would read that for sure.
Alex, before I let you go, what's the number one Ostberg family tradition you're looking forward to if you guys do that?
We do, yeah, we do. We're a big Christmas Eve family, which is grounded in my dad's Norwegian cultural heritage. In Norway, they're more of a Christmas Eve family than Christmas Day family. So it's centered around typically like a big dinner with a lot of other traditions that surround it. So that's always a lot of fun. That'll be what we're up to on the 24th. So looking forward to experiencing that as usual.
I love it. If you guys are all looking to give Alex and I a Christmas gift, subscribe to the newsletter, and it will in turn gift you many ideas that you can apply directly into your training and into your racing. The newsletter has benefited me greatly, and the conception of it was simply that I knew your brain, I knew your genius from this podcast and our conversations offline, and wanted to have a place where those thoughts and those ideas could sit. So again, completely free to subscribe. I've left a link in the show notes. Every single podcast I do, there's a link in the show notes. So subscribe. And also, Alex and I are generally pretty quick to reply to any questions or comments, and always open to critical feedback or wisdom. So whether you're harshly offended that we think you shouldn't go on a long cooldown, or you liked a specific piece or you want to see more or something, please hit us with that. And Alex, I'll talk to you soon. I think we're going to do one final episode before the end of the year potentially. And as always, appreciate your time, man.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure. Merry Christmas. Happy holidays, everybody.